Roughly 1 in 8 DRAM chips shipped into a Chinese-branded device last quarter carried a logo that did not exist as a commercial supplier 5 years ago. The Commerce Department's 2023 restriction on Micron selling to Chinese defense-adjacent buyers was written to hold that number at 0. The number is not 0. This script measures one count, the number of DRAM suppliers with a real output share in China, takes 2 dated readings, and follows the mechanism that moved it. Early 2023, before the restriction landed, 3 foreign names held effectively the entire addressable market for DRAM inside Chinese brand devices. Micron, Samsung, and SK Hynix divided the pool. Domestic output share was commercially negligible, below any threshold analysts tracked with confidence, too small to appear in vendor qualification lists as anything other than a placeholder. 3 foreign, 0 domestic. That was the reading. Mid-2025, the reading is different. 3 foreign names still hold the bulk of volume. That has not changed. What has changed is the composition of the remainder. CXMT has entered commercial shipments of DDR5 product. One analyst house estimates CXMT's output now accounts for a measurable single-digit percentage of units consumed domestically. 3 foreign, 1 domestic, 3 and 1. That is the count now. The count moved by 1. That one is the first domestic entrant to clear the commercial shipment threshold in this product class in China. 1 domestic supplier. 1. That single unit on the counter is the delta this script is built around, because what it represents is a category change rather than a volume change. A domestic name on the approved vendor list means Chinese original equipment manufacturer procurement desks have a lever they did not have before, a credible, if imperfect, alternative at the negotiating table. Market share figures report units shipped. They do not report what Samsung or SK Hynix were forced to concede on price or on allocation priority once a third name appeared on the approved vendor list. The raw share figure understates that leverage, and the leverage is the more consequential reading. The mechanism behind that count moving is the restriction itself. Micron's partial exclusion from the defense-adjacent procurement pool in China created an unserved segment. CXMT, already in development, accelerated qualification timelines for Chinese original equipment manufacturer buyers who needed a fallback vendor on paper before they needed one in volume. That is the sequence. Restriction creates an unserved pocket. The pocket becomes an incentive. The incentive pulls forward qualification timelines that might otherwise have stretched across another product generation. The wall did not hold the number. It bent the curve toward the reading the wall was built to prevent. Think of it this way, the restriction functions like a flood barrier installed on one branch of a river. The total flow does not stop, it finds the other branch. If the other branch was narrow and poorly maintained, the new flow does not just move water, it widens the channel. The channel that existed before the barrier was built is now carrying more than its engineers planned for, and its capacity will keep expanding as long as the barrier stands on the other branch. CXMT's qualification pipeline grew because of that widening, not only because of the volume directly displaced from Micron. Early 2023, CXMT's announced process geometry for DRAM production sat at a node that placed it roughly a generation behind SK Hynix's mainstream production. The gap was real, and it was wide. Mid-2025, CXMT has announced and begun sampling DDR5 product, which requires a node competitive with, though not identical to, what Samsung and SK Hynix were shipping in their mainstream DDR5 lines 2 to 3 years prior. The node gap shrank. It is not closed. The incumbents have continued their own node advancement, so the absolute distance remains, but the rate of CXMT's progression over this 2-year window is faster than the rate that characterized Chinese DRAM development in the prior 5-year period. Faster. Not fast enough to close, but faster. The mechanism behind that node progression is worth separating from the output story because they have different ceilings. Equipment sourcing diversified after export controls tightened. CXMT increased reliance on domestically available lithography and etch tooling. That imposed yield constraints that are real and that this script will return to, but it did not halt node advancement. The constraint reshaped the engineering roadmap rather than stopping it. When access to leading-edge foreign equipment narrows, the roadmap adapts to what is available, and what is available has been sufficient to reach DDR5 sampling. Sampling is not volume production, but it is the reading that matters for tracking the node gap, and the node gap is closing faster than the output gap. The capability ceiling is rising even while the volume contribution is still modest. Node parity is not performance parity, and this is where the CXMT node story needs qualification. Process geometry is one input. Density per die, latency at high bandwidth, and power consumption per bit are the outputs that original equipment manufacturer engineers actually specify when they write a bill of materials. The node number alone flatters CXMT's position relative to the incumbents. A supplier can match the geometry label on a product and still deliver a different electrical result because the memory cell architecture underneath the process node carries its own set of design choices accumulated over decades. Samsung and SK Hynix carry that accumulated architecture. CXMT does not yet. That gap is harder to measure than the geometry gap, it is not tracked in public data with confidence, and it is the gap that matters most to server DRAM and high-bandwidth memory buyers. The node progression reading is real. The inference from that reading to full competitive parity is not. Early 2023, no domestic DDR5 product existed at commercial price points for Chinese original equipment manufacturer buyers. The domestic DRAM price for that category was not low, it was absent. Mid-2025, CXMT's DDR5 pricing is reported by procurement-side analysts to sit below Samsung and SK Hynix's commercial list prices for equivalent density modules. One analyst house estimates the discount runs in the range of the mid-teens percentage versus foreign incumbents' China channel pricing. That estimate comes from a single analyst house and has not been independently audited. Treat it as a directional signal rather than a confirmed reading. The mechanism behind that price position is important to name correctly. CXMT's cost structure is not more efficient than Samsung's or SK Hynix's. A company shipping single-digit share volume on a node that is 2 to 3 years behind the leading edge does not have an efficiency advantage over incumbents at full-scale production. The price gap compensates buyers for the qualification risk of adding a new supplier. It is a market entry price, not a structural cost advantage. The discount signals that buyers are still uncertain about CXMT's consistency at scale, and CXMT is absorbing margin to build the qualification pipeline that will eventually reduce that uncertainty. When the uncertainty falls, the discount will likely narrow. The price position as it stands is not a durable reading, it is a transition period reading. Micron's position in China is the fourth delta worth measuring because its shape is larger than the restricted segment alone. Early 2023, Micron held a meaningful three-way share of the China DRAM market across consumer, mobile, and server segments. No procurement desk restriction applied to the bulk of Chinese original equipment manufacturer buyers. Mid-2025, Micron's access to defense-adjacent procurement pools in China has been formally restricted. Its share in the broader civilian market remains, but the volume displaced from the restricted segment has been reallocated, and the psychological effect on procurement desks extends well beyond that restricted category. An original equipment manufacturer that depends on a single foreign supplier for a commodity input that has already been restricted for one customer category has a board-level incentive to qualify a second source even in categories where the foreign supplier is still permitted. CXMT's qualification pipeline grew because of that incentive, not only because of the volume directly displaced. Micron's total China exposure has shrunk by more than the excluded segment alone suggests, because the precautionary diversification that followed the restriction spread into civilian categories that the restriction did not touch. The delta is larger than the restricted segment reading implies. If you wanted to hold CXMT's estimated quarterly output as a physical object rather than a share percentage, stack the DRAM dies. CXMT is estimated to ship in a single quarter, and the column of silicon would rise to a height comparable to a mid-sized office building, not a skyscraper, not a single wafer. A mid-sized office building of silicon present and real, representing what a single-digit share reading looks like when you render it at physical scale. That is the instrument's reading on CXMT's current contribution. Real, present, and not yet a skyline. Now the margin of error on all of those readings because each of the figures above carries uncertainty that the headline count does not show. CXMT's output figures come from company statements and procurement-side channel checks. Independent third-party verification of yield rates, the fraction of dies per wafer that pass at full specification, does not exist in public form. A supplier can ship single-digit share volume while binning a large fraction of its wafers at reduced specification, selling those as lower-grade product and reporting the gross unit count. The share figure may be accurate on units while flattering CXMT's position on quality-adjusted output. Gross units and quality-adjusted units are different instruments, and the public data does not separate them. The second source of potential error sits in how domestic semiconductor progress gets reported in channels adjacent to government funding. There is a documented history of counting capacity investment, wafer starts, and design tapeouts as proxies for commercial output when the commercial output number is not yet where the narrative wants it to be. If CXMT's reported figures blend qualified commercial shipments with pre-qualification samples or subsidized test volumes shipped to affiliated buyers, the commercial share reading is overstated. The instrument this channel is using has no independent way to separate those categories from public data. The reading is real as far as it goes. How far it goes is not confirmed. The third ceiling is physical rather than documentary. DDR5 at CXMT's current process geometry is not the same product as DDR5 at Samsung's leading node. Density per die, power efficiency, and latency at high bandwidth are all functions of both the node and the memory cell architecture. CXMT's share can grow inside the segment of Chinese original equipment manufacturer, demand that is tolerant of those differences, largely consumer-grade applications and portions of the mobile market, and still face a hard ceiling in server DRAM and high-bandwidth memory, where the node gap and the physical limits of CXMT's current architecture are disqualifying factors. The headline share figure does not mark that ceiling. It reports the volume that clears the ceiling the market currently has, and it is silent on the ceiling the market for high-performance compute is going to impose. The instrument synthesis across those three uncertainty points, the count of suppliers moved and CXMT's output is real. Both of those facts survive the uncertainty. What does not survive scrutiny is any inference that quality-adjusted share equals gross unit share, or that the mechanism that moved the count in consumer DRAM will transfer without modification to the segments where the incumbent's node advantage is largest and most consequential. The reading is confirmed. The extrapolation is not. The supplier count in China's DRAM market moved from a stable 3 foreign structure to a 3 foreign plus 1 domestic structure inside a 2-year window. The one that moved the count is local, is shipping DDR5, and is priced below the incumbents. Those 3 facts would have been projections in 2023. They are readings now. The restriction that removed Micron from defense-adjacent procurement in China did not preserve the supplier count it found. It applied pressure to a count that had one direction to move, and the count moved in that direction. The metric that was meant to stay at 2 plus 0 is now 2 plus 1, and the plus 1 is domestic. 2 suppliers then. 2 foreign plus 1 now. 2 plus 1. A wall that redirects the river does not reduce the water. It finds the other channel for it, and the other channel is now wider than it was when the wall went up. The number to watch: if CXMT's domestic unit share crosses into double digits by the close of 2026, the supplier count will have moved again, not in name but in weight. A single-digit reading that becomes a double-digit reading is not the same instrument in the same range. It is a different category of market presence, and it would represent a second threshold cleared in the same window that the first one was. That quarterly reading, when it arrives, is when the delta becomes a trend. The count moved once. Whether it moves in weight is the question the next dated reading will answer. If you want that reading when it lands, subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel measures the count and comes back when it moves.